Okay, so welcome everyone. So my name is Paul Walsh. I'm president of the society, and so it's great to be here today for the Barrington Lecture. But I just want to do one thing before we actually get to the main business of today, which is the Barrington Lecture. And so I just wanted this to be written into the minutes of the meeting. So in memoriam of the late Professor Donald O'Neill, who passed away on October 10th, 2023. Donald made excellent contributions to the field of labour economics, the inaugural Low Pay Commission in Ireland, and was also president of the Irish Economic Association. We were honoured to award him the Barrington Medal during the 153rd session of the Barrington Lecture Series in recognition of him as a promising and talented young economist. He read his paper to the Statistical and Socio-Economic Society of Ireland on March 30th, year 2000, and I have his citation in the journal and his handle online in the Tara archive, so people can go back and reread the paper. All right. So that's that business done, and we have that in the minutes. So I'm delighted today to welcome. Sorry, I need to get your slides up. I have them here. Okay. Yas is well familiar with this system. I have to keep remembering this is actually a computer, right? So let me get this up. Here we go. So Alan Fernihough is this year's winner of the Barrington Prize. It's actually a very competitive round, and we're very delighted. And I think afterwards we'll let you earn your lecture first. We have a medal, and it brings an award of €2,500, so it's not insubstantial. But we'll let you be your own chair. And obviously the titles here: Economic Geography and the Irish Border, a Market Access Approach. Congratulations, and we're very much looking forward to your lecture today. Is that okay, Alan?
Yes.
So,
thanks very much.
Can
I stand and then just through?
Or you can use the mouse as if it's a computer.
Oh yeah. Maybe will I just stand here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that good?
Yeah. Sorry.
And then
how do I get this big?
You want to minimize the
It's Control L.
there, just there.
Yeah. If you press Control L, just make it.
You want me to get rid of it altogether?
Yeah, so it just blows out really big. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much. SSSI it's been a huge award, and I was delighted to win. I can do my thank yous at the end. So I'll go into the topic. It's about trying to understand the effect of the Irish border on economic development in Ireland. Economists love borders, and the reason why, because images like this, the 38 parallel in Korea, and you can see a clear divide between north and south. In the south, you have a market economy. In the north, you have a totalitarian communist state. And the difference in economic conditions is apparent by just the lights at night. In South Korea, you have a modern economy where they're able to keep the lights on at night. And then in the north, they're poor. And the lights are basically only on in Guiyang, and it's dark everywhere else. So it's a very vivid illustration of the power of political institutions in shaping economic growth. Another example that's often used in macro development is the Noailles border that straddles the US-Mexican border. Here you have one town divided by a wall, and once you step across from one side to the other, the GDP per capita in that area goes up by around $50,000. So it's a huge difference, not only in terms of just the statistics and how it's measured, but also visually. I mean, you can clearly see the US side versus the Mexican side. On the US side, they've got modern buildings, they're well kept, new cars and vehicles, where on the southern side, things are older, more dilapidated. Very visual effects of the importance of political economy for development. Borders are also interesting to economists for another reason. And that's because they're important for shaping spatial economic development and regional patterns of economic growth. Why this occurs is difficult to say just looking at descriptive statistics. For instance, countries are typically separated by physical geography. Spain and France is the Pyrenees, Germany and France it's the Rhine River, and so on. So we see these physical barriers, which are first order geographic effects, which we know go hand in hand with economic development. For instance, ruggedness is associated with poor economic development in regions. But there's another reason why borders might matter for economic development, and that is second order geography effects. The Paul Krugman New Economic Geography that says, well, borders, even when they're placed along completely even spatial territory, will still dictate the spatial concentration of economic activity simply because it reduces market access and producer access around those areas. So what you really need to do to understand the effect of borders on regional economic development is have some kind of natural experiment where you hold those physical differences constant and you have just a border that goes over political lines. So is it next slide? Is there a way to get the slides back up?
Yeah, sorry. Trying to, yeah, I'm not messing it up. So can I give the mouse again?
Oh, yeah.
Where's the
In the PDF.
yeah. Oh, yeah, it's fine. Exactly.
So just killed my punchline for next. So what we see is, well, we need a physical, we need a border frontier that doesn't follow these physical elements, and that's where the Northern Ireland border comes in. We can see, here's an example. There's several on this article I found online, where you have a farm straddling this, well, UK, EU, but it's really Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and in the driveway of the farm, that's in Northern Ireland. At the front of the house, it's Ireland. There's a great video here. I'm not going to show because I don't think I'll have the time. But Paddy McCardle, you know what he's from based on that surname. So he's up at the near Newry, and he's there's a guy who's come over from England to do an interview for BBC or something like that. And he's like, where's the border? And he's like, well, that's Northern Ireland there. Here's the Republic of Ireland. Oh, and that's Northern Ireland there, and so on and so forth. There's also brilliant videos on YouTube surrounding pig smuggling and just like the type of border characters and part of the if you want to blame why this is maybe this lecture is not as polished as it could be, it's because I spent a lot of time on YouTube watching all these old videos. But here's another example of the Northern Ireland Republic of Ireland border. It's just like down a road diagonally. So you're driving along and you're passing from Northern Ireland into the Republic of Ireland and then back down to Northern Ireland at the end of the road. Anyone who's had the sat nav on, if you're driving from like Belfast to Donegal, you just fly over the border several times. So there's no geographic boundaries there. And that's what makes it an ideal case for this type of analysis, trying to understand borders and their effect on market access. Here's another Google maps the satellite image where maybe the farmer in question wouldn't like you going up taking photos of his barn, but you can see the barn actually straddles the border. Okay, so you have animals that walk north and south based on that. So it's an excellent kind of testing ground for natural experiments around borders and new economic geography. What motivates this interest in the border is, well, Brexit in the last decade has been Brexit, and the idea of, well, how hard is the border between North and South going to be, advantages, disadvantages, but also not just in North and South, but with further appeal is this idea of regional policy and left behind areas, and both in the Republic of Ireland and in Northern Ireland, their future planning framework specifically says we need some kind of leveling up, and they point to the border region on both sides of the border as kind of being an area that needs attention. So it's largely seen as the least economically developed region on the island of Ireland, whether you're North and South, and we don't even need to have a conversation about our living standards higher or lower, because it applies equally in both jurisdictions. And what I'm trying to do is take this question and superimpose the literature of new economic geography started by Paul Krugman in the early 90s. And new economic geography stresses that there can be, so in the US, there's a massive concentration of various industries and economic activity. And rather than using just first order geography effects, Paul Krugman and several others over the years developed this new economic geography literature based on models of trade. And key in those models is this idea of market access and producer access. So once you put a once you put an international frontier somewhere, make going across it difficult in, whether you're going to have tariffs, whether you're going to be checked, whether rules or currency might differ. Once you have those differences, crossing over geographical territory, that's going to reduce market access. That means the prices might be different, the price you pay might be different, the price as a producer you will get will also be different. So that would, in essence, hamper economic development and cause a regional imbalance. And what is good about Ireland, and why I'm interested in this as an economic historian, is that I have a large bank of data that goes back pre-famine Ireland up to the most recent censuses. So we can take a long run view on this and see whether, not just whether the border is more undeveloped, because it could have been more undeveloped before the border came in to begin with, let's say, for instance, but that there's this natural experiment where you plant down this line that doesn't really, well, it's based on the 626 county difference, but it doesn't really have any physical dimension other than say, okay, we'll fit it into the 626 separation paradigm, and then see whether that changes the trajectory of, well, I'm going to use population as a proxy for economic development. So firstly, how much market access is lost because of this border? And secondly, does this have an effect on population, both in the short, medium, and long run? If we zoom out of the idea that we're looking at regional differences and that I'm going to exploit spatially disaggregated data, and just look at the two jurisdictions and their history that predates partition, you can see that for all the differences in the areas regarding political institutions and population movements and so on, that the trajectory both in the Irish Free State Republic of Ireland and in Northern Ireland are actually quite similar over the course of history. So both Northern Ireland and the Irish Free State population is declining, well, massively during the famine and the subsequent waves of migration, less so in Northern Ireland, but it's the same pattern. And then it's like a U shape, it kind of flattens out in the 20th century, and then second half both grow in the post-Second World War period, and then at the end of the 20th century, coming into the 21st century, the populations start rising quickly in both jurisdictions. So despite the differences, there is a similarity in the population trajectory. The second point that is interesting, I think, here is that whilst population counts follow this U pattern, population concentration follows an inverted U pattern to go in tandem with the population. So what I mean here is this is a Herfindahl Index of Spatial Concentration of Economic Activity, and it going up in the Irish Free State, Republic of Ireland, in the 19th century means that the population is falling and it's becoming more concentrated in already populated areas. And then as the population increases both in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland in the 20th century, we get a decline in spatial concentration. This is because people are now living in suburbs rather than those previously dense areas. So while the analysis here is going to focus on Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland separately, in terms of the spatial concentration, which is, the imbalances in population, they're actually follow quite similar trajectories, which I found interesting. And even for all the negative effects of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, you see a little dip in population here, but really it doesn't do much to shake off its long run trajectory of growth. And then the Celtic Tiger is obviously really big for the Republic of Ireland as well. To give some historical context on the Irish border, the idea of separating North and South gains legs in the 1920s with the Government of Ireland Act, bringing it into kind of a legal framework around it. Then there's the Anglo-Irish Treaty, and you're creating an international frontier in Ireland. And this was not particularly, like if someone, say for instance, you told someone about this in the 19th century, they probably would have been quite surprised that this was actually going to happen. Customs posts come in on the April Fool's Day, 1923, and there's a story where a photographer starts out in County Derry, crosses over the border to take a few photographs, goes back home, stopped on the way back home by a customs officer, and he says he has to pay duty on his camera. And I know what I would have said as I spoke, is this an April Fool's Day joke? But no, it wasn't, okay? So he was surprised by that. So the border separates the 26 counties from the 6 counties. They were going to redraw it so they established what was called a boundary commission. And the idea of a boundary commission is that there's places in Donegal that would have preferred to be in the in Northern Ireland. And then there's places like, say, for instance, in Armagh that would have preferred to be in the Free State. And they were going to redraw it along political lines to just make sure it's not this, cavalier 26-6, but that it's leaked the boundary commission and then it never goes ahead. But interestingly, the boundary commission within its remit was not only just to redraw the border along political dimension, but they said there was a thing that a remit to make sure that they were respecting economic reality. So don't do this basically if it's going to disrupt economic activity. So they're very acutely aware that the border acts as disruption for market access. And before I talk about smuggling, there's a very real example in the town of Fernihough. I don't know if people have been, it's on the Donegal-Fermanagh border, and it's a tiny, well, you talk about the first order physical, there is a bridge that separates north and south, but I would be confident that I could jump over that river myself. Eggs in 1933 on the Northern Irish side of that town are 1 shilling 3 pence, but they're only 11 pence in the Free State. So there's differences in prices for places that are less than a mile apart because of the border being there. Now, one thing that goes hand in hand with the Irish border coming in is that it reduces market access, but in some senses it also has some opportunities for people. And smuggling is a big part of the economic landscape around the border regions. And this goes through various phases. So it's not really, there's not really much smuggling at the start. And then in the 1930s with the Anglo-Irish trade war, then smuggling becomes a big thing because you can get your cows up to Northern Ireland. If you can get them over a field without getting stopped by customs, you can then send them over to Britain afterwards, or you can have them slaughtered in the north as well. And that's what Johnson uses to estimate the amount of smuggling occurring in the 1930s. And it is substantial. And there's all sorts of funny anecdotes about people late at night trying to drive cows through fields in the dark, and customs officers chasing them with torches and all sorts. And there is a system of approved versus unapproved roads as well. So approved roads are ones where there's customs posts at, and you got your goods checked when you're going cross border. And then there's unapproved roads where they don't have that. And well, I mean, if I was north and south, I'd just go to the unapproved, and that's actually what a lot of people just did. Like, they were generally the better quality roads had customs posts, and the big bulky freight was delivered by train, which is easy to count, and so there's not that much smuggling there. So yeah, there's so smuggling is widespread with the Anglo-Irish, and then it amplifies over when both the UK and Ireland joined the common market. You have this racket in pig smuggling where you can bring pigs from one side or the other and claim subsidies in both jurisdictions. A lot of that going on, but it's still, I would argue that there's this international frontier. It disrupts market access in these places, and whether it has opportunities that then percolate into the population is, that's an empirical question. I'll be able to answer that with the data. And the unapproved roads, so there were unapproved roads, and then there's this constant battle between customs officers who some of them seem to be friendly in different zones. There's definitely heterogeneity in terms of how much people are allowed to smuggle versus others, but some customs officers wound some unapproved roads. So they actually go out and put boulders in the middle of the road, much to the consternation of locals who now have roads cut off because they've been blocked. And there's an example of customs posts in the Free State. You can see they're going through basically everything in this person's car. They obviously decided not to go through one of the unapproved roads. Now, if we zoom out from the interesting Irish context around this border and just look at the economics literature surrounding trade and regional economic development, and how does this paper fit into new economic geography? So with new economic geography, it gives a model that helps explain spatial concentration of economic activity that doesn't rely on physical boundaries. And it has various features. You've got market access, you've got increasing returns to scale. So once an industry kind of starts in a place, then with the increasing returns and market access, there's agglomeration effects. It kind of acts like a force that will just drag people, activity, and so on in, and it will cause places to specialize in certain industries, and that fits the pattern in US data and elsewhere. But if you're talking about this from an empirical perspective, not theoretical, how can we test the kind of fundamentals of new economic geography when it comes to development? There's two ways to do this, and I've been involved in one surrounding transport. And the first way is to look at transport innovations. They increase market access in space, but some places benefit more than others. And if those places that benefit more than others develop at a different rate, then you can say market access improvements help benefit the economy. So there's a paper by Dave Donaldson and Rick Hornbeck from 2016. What they look at railroad expansion in the US. And they find that the introduction of the railroads in the 19th century helped with US agricultural land values. It made land more valuable. And they say, well, there's a market access, it fits with the new economic geography, and they overturn to an extent the traditional Bob Vogel genuine savings, who kind of said railroads didn't matter for economic development, although that's debatable. There's a paper by myself and Ronan Lyons looking at the same thing for Ireland. And that's what I'm going to use. The data that I use for this is the same that we use for that paper. And what we do is we look at Ireland in the 19th century. We look at the introduction of railroads. But because Ireland, post-famine Ireland is a unique context, we look at market access both internally, domestic market access, and further afield. So how quickly can you get to places elsewhere in Ireland? And how quickly can you get to a port that will bring you over to Britain or further afield? And we find there's a distinction when it comes to those two elements around population in Ireland. Domestic market access improvements stimulate population growth, which in the Irish, it means less population loss. But opening yourself to international market, that actually depresses growth. So, and you know, that we say that explains partially the movement to pastoral agriculture and depopulation in Ireland. And that's the transport innovation to look at market access and its effect on development. The other one is just what I'm doing now, borders. There's a paper by Steve Redding and Daniel Strum, 2008. West-East Germany, post-Second World War, they put a border in Germany, and they find that towns in West Germany that are closer to the border, population growth is slower in those towns. And the reason they give, and they test alternative hypotheses as to why this might be the case, but the reason they give is that it's a loss of market access channel. That's an international border, but actually subnational borders seem to matter as well. So they have a subnational border in the Sichuan province of China. And it's a recent paper in the Journal of Economic Geography. And they find that that matters for population growth as well. So you're actually hampering market access even within your own economy. That seems to matter. That's the creation of borders. You can use the dissolution of borders as well to look at changes in market access. And that's what Brulhart and co-authors do in 2018. They look at the removal of the Iron Curtain in Europe, and that impacts Austria. So Austria borders a lot of countries that are in former Eastern Europe, and they find that it has effects for wages and I think it's investment as well. The closest thing to what I'm doing here is was performed in an exercise by Cormac O'Grada and Brendan Walsh back in 2006. And they looked at the border from the perspective of just putting a dummy between on a county level. So the counties that are border counties in the Republic of Ireland, they get a 1, everywhere else is a 0. And they find that that does have an effect between 1911 and 1996. But they go beyond that as well to looking at border towns. So I think the town that's furthest away from the border in their data set is Coleraine, which is around 30 miles from the border. But within that channel, they find a negative slope associated with the border. So the closer you are to the border, the more you suffer based on their data. But I'm going to use a market access approach, and the data is like a finer resolution, and it's over a longer time period. And the data comes from this Aero Maynooth project, which gives population in Ireland in very disaggregated units. There are 3,400 areas. The average size of a DED is around 25 kilometers square, so pretty small, very disaggregated. Now, their data in the Maynooth project data only goes to the 2002 World Cup. So I augment this with data from 2011, 2021, 22, because the North and South had different census dates. And then I refit it, and we get this really long run data set. Because we want all things equal, I have some initial condition control variables. So we're able to control for land values in 1911 and initial population density, just to account for that these areas affected by the border might differ in those respects and would have different population trajectories anyway. And finally, I have the 1911 census individual returns that I'm able to look at the Catholic share in district electoral divisions. So in the Free State Republic of Ireland, this isn't probably as important in Northern Ireland, where it's typically seen that maybe areas along the border tend to be more Catholic and don't get as much investment and public goods and so on, just to bring in that there might be an element of discrimination in the creation of the Northern Irish State that I'm able to control for those spatial differences. The last data variable I need is the market access one. So market access has to come from somewhere. And underpinning the market access measure is what I was doing when my son was born. I was staying up all night drawing every single road in Ireland in the 1840s. So you have the entire road network from the 1840s that I'm going to say is there were a lot of improvements in the 19th century, especially during the famine. They had lots of road building projects and so on. But that's roughly, there are roads everywhere. But the big improvement is in terms of train lines. We also got navigable waterways. So I know both the speed and cost to go from A to B anywhere in Ireland, roughly in 1911, early 1920s, just on when the border is created. I know how easy you go from A to B, wherever you want those A to B's to be. So this is like Google Maps. Maybe I need to create Fernihough maps. And armed with that, I can create a market access measure because I know the costs which come into this variable here, tau. And market access, the other element in market access is not how easy you can go from A to B, but where A and B are. So if B is like a really densely populated city, that's a good market, okay? So getting more access to higher population areas, that's going to feed in as being popular. As being positively related to market access, give more weight to your market access measure. So you've got your population of everywhere else, and then the cost of and time of getting to everywhere else, right? So I have that structure in there. So you're for I, the D, the I, J is everywhere else, and then I add all of those up. The last element that I need to complete this exercise is this theta parameter here. And theta is known as the elasticity of trade, and it underpins lots of international trade research where people will have a theoretical model, they'll have some econometrics, and they'll estimate, the effect of tariffs on trade, and then they'll want to plug that back in to be able to say what are the welfare effects. But to know those welfare effects, you need to have some assumption on what this theta is, and it's a big area of debate. Some people say it could be as high as 13, others say it's as low as 1. And what number you put in for that, no matter how sharp your econometrics are when it comes to getting a point estimate and really tight standard errors, you don't know your theta, your welfare effects could be all over the place, right? I think based on my reading and experience that the choice of theta is context specific, this elasticity trade, how sensitive you are to price changes and how much that's going to stimulate you trading. So I'm very agnostic as to what value to choose here, and I'll show you why. I think theta equal to 4 is probably best suited, but I did a calibration exercise whereby I just tested loads of different thetas and picked the one that gave me the most explanatory power when it came to looking at land values. So obviously you'd imagine like your land value should be in part explained by market access. So if I can just kind of keep on chipping away at this to get the one with the most traction, then I think it's the most, it's probably the best one and the most applicable one for this application. And the last thing I need to do is to say, well, we've got this market access, how connected you are and where you're connected to, but why does the border matter? Well, the border matters because it cuts you off from places that you were previously able to get to with ease, or it makes it much harder to. So there's a literature on international trade looking for border effects. And typically they find that border effects are, the effect of borders is in the magnitude of 6. So, you know, if you put a border between a place, it will reduce trade by 6 times less trade, let's say. So what I do for the Irish Free State is I say, you know, all those places you were able to get to in Northern Ireland, you have no market access for them. I'm going to divide that market access by 6. If you're in Northern Ireland, I say those places in the Free State, their market access, you get that, but I'm dividing it by 6. And then the difference between the two is what I call the border effect. What does this look like? Well, I'm going to turn up and turn down the theta to show you the difference it can make. If theta is equal to 2, that means trade is really easy and goods just flow everywhere, let's say. And you can see the border actually has a really, you know, a really big effect everywhere. The effects are distributed widely across Ireland. Now that to me doesn't make sense, right? It's just not only does it not fit the calibration exercise, but it's exaggerating the border effect. What I choose is theta equal to 4, and you can see it makes more sense. You've got the border in red, and then you're going from, you're losing more than 70% of your market access to losing basically none of your market access. And you can see that places in Donegal suffer a lot, but places in Derry don't, right? So rather, you know, what one could do instead of looking at market access is just look, how far away are you from the border? But it doesn't take into the account the asymmetries. For Derry, you're closer to that big urban area, or Derry, or you can just get to Belfast, which Donegal in the far northwest, you're really stuck. And similar like Newry, just around, just above Dundalk, it's not badly hit at all because they can go to Drogheda or Dublin, let's say, for instance. So they're not as cut off as elsewhere. And then in Northern Ireland, you've got, you know, places around Armagh that really suffer, or disproportionately so. So there's a lot of nice variation that I think reflects reality. And then when you increase theta to 6, you know, it's just, it seems like nowhere's really that badly affected by the border. But I'm going to test the robustness of this later. So if you want to just take all those DEDs, aggregate them into counties, we can have a league table of who's doing the worst and who's doing the best. And Dublin's doing the best, is not affected by the border, and that, I think, to me, that makes sense, right? You're in Dublin, you're already close to a big city, a big port. It's not going to affect you. Whereas Donegal, you're losing nearly a third of your market access. It's pretty catastrophic for some areas. Then Monaghan and Armagh, you basically got all the border counties, but you know the difference between Louth and Donegal is 20 percentage points, right? Both are border counties, but clearly Donegal's far more affected. The descriptives on this look something like this. So this is a panel of plots, and what I'm doing is I'm looking at population change, the median population change in my sample of 3,400 DEDs. The median population change stratified by market access loss bins. So these are places that lose more than 30% of their market access, Donegal type places, and then the least affected are those with less than 10%. And you can see that there's a gradient both north and south, depending on some if you have the post period as being 1936, you can see after the border has come in those 15, less than 20 years, it has had an effect on population growth. There's a gradient there. There's a gradient still there in 1961, 91, and still seemingly there today, although in the Republic of Ireland, it seems a kind of a weird non-linear thing. Although I should stress that there's very few places that lose more than 30% of their market access. So if I put in error bars here with confidence intervals, they're pretty big, right? And the other thing about this is, well, we don't know these places that lose market access, what they would have developed like anyway, because they're different in other ways. So what we want to do is have some kind of econometric regression model where you control for those differences. And that's what I'm doing here. So the outcome what I'm going to be looking at is the change in logged population between some endpoint t. So I'm going to vary the endpoint from 1841 to 2022, 2021, 22, and 1911, the last year in the census before the border comes in. Then on the right hand side, we've got the border loss measured as I've described. And then I put in loads of these controls, latitude and longitude, just taking, for instance, that there's a east-west division, north-south division. Anyway, land values, so just accounting for that, they might be less commercially developed to begin with. Population density in 1911 and the Catholic share. And rather than having these enter in as linear functions, I put them in as splines, and in some case interaction splines. And that, you know, if I estimate this using linear models, linear values, I get the same results. And basically, if I get rid of all the controls, I get the same results. It's quite robust. But the F1, F2, and F3 are just nonlinear functions that I'm happy to let the data lead me and tell me what way I need to control for these things and see how robust it is. So use a regression spline approach. And underpinning this is why I think these are causal, as I can say that this is a diff in diff type strategy. So it's a causal framework, and I'm controlling for the things I need to control. But the other thing I need to be wary of is pre-trends. So even if I control for all these things, these border areas might have been growing at a different rate before the introduction of the border. So in the next slide, you can see what the results look like. So I don't pool the two jurisdictions together. Now, if I do, interestingly enough, what happens is entirely what you'd expect. The result and standard errors are like, 1 plus 1 divided by 2. It's just the average of the two, okay? And the pattern for the Irish Free State, then Republic of Ireland, is like this. So before the introduction of the border, you've just got a null effect. The standard errors are pretty small. They overlap always with the null. So there's no pre-trend, right? So there's nothing happening in these areas. And then all of a sudden the border comes in and very little happens immediately in the aftermath immediately, but thereafter it grows. So from 1961 onwards, you have a large effect that's increasing over time. Now, someone remarked to me last Friday that this doesn't make any sense because with the European Ireland joined the European Community, EU, you would expect to see these differences become attenuated. However, what I'm saying, remember, these are relative differences. So the population could be growing, it's just growing at a slower rate relative to everywhere else. So you have this large, so these are the coefficients and the error bars, and you see it really taking off. So it's in effect, the border regions, those affected most by the border, are the ones that are growing at the slowest rate today. So it seems to have a long run effect. Now, how do you say, for instance, adjust for the fact that people have cars now, or that joining the European Union, you get rid of lots of the border, the end of the troubles, you get rid of lots of the restrictions? Well, there still are impediments, different currencies, different public good provisions, and so on. So there are definitely channels through which this effect could become amplified over time, and that's what the data say. The pattern for Northern Ireland is different. In Northern Ireland, you get this null effect, so there's no pre-trend. Error bars are pretty big because it's a smaller data sample, and I can't see a trend there. It's a straight line, right? And then after the border comes in, you see the population just shift in 1926, and then it increases slightly, and the effect is really big, but really imprecise in 2002 in Northern Ireland, and then it's still there, albeit at a similar level as to the 1950s in modern data. So the border area is still left behind, but again, it's a case whereby you the effect has not gone down over time, despite, so you've introduced the border and all the inconveniences and barriers that go with it. You can take away those, but you can't take away the effect. And this speaks to kind of these agglomeration dispersion forces that could happen over time, where the border comes in the 1920s, you have a one-time reorientation of population in Northern Ireland. And then because you can't get the scale back, no matter what policies you have to kind of alleviate the worst of the border, the population isn't coming back, let's say. And that's a summary in this slide of these results. The Northern Ireland immediate effect could be some kind of residential sorting as well. It's like, okay, we know our lives are going to be disrupted by this border and the market access implications it will have for the future, so we'll move elsewhere. And if you don't like the border loss measure I have, and you're skeptical that it's an accurate portrayal of the border effects, I also just created a binary treatment effect measure that says, do you lose more than 10% of your market access by the border? And if you do those results, they look very similar north and south. Now, for some reason, the south gets these huge confidence intervals in the last data point. So it's just saying the potential amount of outcomes in that Y variable are far wider. And but the point estimate is still in line with the previous ones. And remember, this is a binary variable, so it's quite easy to interpret. You're able to say that border affected areas suffer by 15% relative to those non, and the effect in Northern Ireland actually quite similar as well. You're talking around 15% knock on your population growth. The other thing I did was, so there's a bunch of robustness checks I did, but to try and help illustrate these findings, I conducted some counterfactual analysis. And the counterfactual analysis goes like this. So I know how much you lose with the border coming in, and I know what the border effect is on your population. And then I also know what your population is in the future. So it's in the latest data, let's say, for instance. So to get a counterfactual population, it's just like what your population is now minus the border loss effect. So how much border you lose by the effect. And then because I don't want to have a case whereby people from Donegal move to Dublin and then they get counted twice, I adjust for residential sorting by having a very simple county level correction where the share of the population born outside the county will reduce the effect, let's say. And this is what it looks like for both north and south. And as you can see that in the Republic of Ireland, the population you're saying around 2.5%, 3% would be 2.5%, 3% bigger today without the border coming in, and that effect has gone over time. So relative to the null, I should say, so like the population growth in the Republic of Ireland has not been zero since 1999. So relative, so you're talking 3%, and in Northern Ireland, it's closer to 5% now, in line with what we saw those coefficient estimates. The immediate effect is there in Northern Ireland as well, and the effect being larger, 5% versus 3%, just reflects the fact that even though the coefficients are similar here and larger in the Republic, less areas in the Republic of Ireland were affected by the border. And once you aggregate this bunch of null places, the total effect on the population is going to be less. If you like your county league tables, here's one. It's the counterfactual versus actual population. And Donegal is by far the worst hit. The population of Donegal, according to this, should be 250,000 today, rather than the nearly 170. So it's 50. So it's a very big effect. But it's not ridiculous to think that the population of Donegal would have this amount of people, because, I mean, before the famine, it had 300,000 people. So it's still less than the famine. And then you have places like Dublin, Clare. Lots of places are not affected by the border. The potential mechanisms, they're in the paper. I go through them. How outside of the, if you want to think, like a new economic geography and just think along the lines of, oh, we have all these equations and the only way it can happen is through this Greek letter hitting this one and this, variable. But in reality, what's happening on the ground and what are the potential mechanisms? There's a few ways you could think about them, like you're removing inconveniences from the border around getting your car checked, but you still have inconveniences like just being able to get simple things like phone coverage, public goods provisions. If you have, say, for instance, your Department for Education, you're less likely to set up a school on the border because you're not going to serve the other community, even though there are lots of incidences where school children go north and south to school. But it does, for those public goods things, you do lose out. And that's a paper by Alan de Bromhead and Ronan Lyons. They look at social housing and they find schooling and probably other things matter for these effects, that you have not only a reorientation of population, but that reorientation has these longer run effects. And in a way, this fits with the economic geography literature, emphasizes persistence. And this is like a dispersion of force happening over time. For instance, resetting the town network after the fall of the Roman Empire benefited Britain versus France because the new towns in Britain were located near rivers where they were locked in France. That's a paper by Guy Michaels and Ferdinand Rauch. Or the other one is, people are obsessed with the Romans, but the Roman roads seem to have an effect on economic trade today because you have areas that were previously connected by Roman roads, maintain those connections, still do business. So business investment flows between places connected by roads that obviously no one's using anymore. And then, for instance, in Britain, the effect of coal still matters today for investment, where you have these areas which had large population because of the Industrial Revolution. Once that's taken away, you have this population locked there, and it has an effect on development. Or they argue they're not as nimble for innovation because they're locked into these economic structures. So just to conclude, I find that partition has a tangible effect on the population in Ireland, and the results are consistent with the new economic geography framework, where market access is important, and second order rather than first order geography will shape spatial development, concentration, dispersion, and agglomeration forces. The fact that the gap between, the gap in the south has grown and in the north has not really abated, despite lots of tinkering with different kind of frictions you'd have at the border, is to me telling. And it's saying that you can have a border come in, you can have the market access lost, you can have population and economic activity reorientating, but trying to unravel that by just getting rid of the border is not the same thing. And that, even, the full removal of the border, let's say, that would not be enough in of itself, I think, to help these places level up. There's lots of different channels you could go on to improve this analysis. You could have a full theoretical model, the advantage of which is that you'd be able to perform welfare counterfactuals and not just talk about population differences, but how much better off people are in terms of their welfare utility. You could have better outcome data, house prices, land values, business locations, investment, wages, income per capita. These kind of measures, I think, would improve it. The other one would be, is bidding on an auction recently, where I have all these old maps of Ireland in the 1920s and 30s. They're old AA guidebooks. So you can see the old road network. When the car comes in, it obviously has a revolutionary effect on transport in terms of multimodal network. Could I update that, bring it into this analysis? Well, you definitely could. Do I have the time, or do I want to? That's a different question. that concludes the lecture. Thank you very much. And I presume I have questions.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
So, we'll take some questions from the floor and online. So I'll get rid of this. Sorry. Let's view. Okay, so yeah, I'll take questions from the floor and online if you want to put your hand up as well. Yeah, Ashley Reynolds, do you want to Ashley, do you want to ask a question there? Come on.
Hi, thanks very much. I found that very interesting. I just have a question about your theta variable, which is your distance decay. So you're assuming that this is constant across all of the centers. Like, why would you assume that distance decay is constant and fixed? Surely it depends on the nature of the center and the nature of the interactions with all of the places that it, are interacting.
Well, the easy answer to that is just it's what's done in the literature, and it's having a elasticity. In a spatial model, your theta would be obviously that decay, but the micro foundations of the new economic geography have it as being something, your sensitivity to price changes and how much that will affect you trading. So in the trade literature, you would have a kind of there's a big back and forth over what this is, and I agree with you. I think it does depend on the context, and it probably could change in Ireland. But just for simplicity, to have it as one value and then have that feeding into market access is the best way to get this into an empirical form that I then can model. But I mean, if you don't like that, I mean, that's why I do the market access loss as a binary measure where you're either losing 10% or less than 10%, and just have that simple dichotomy. And looking along the districts that fit that, I mean, I don't think it's very controversial to designate those places versus the places that didn't as being not border affected, if you know what I mean. So it comes out looking sensible when you want to say, okay, I'm not too comfortable choosing a value for theta or having a zero variance on theta, but so that's what I do. And there are robustness checks you can do where you look at the different theta values, where you look at different discrete cutoffs for the treatment. And I've done those, and they show similar results. So I'm not too worried that it's undermining the analysis per se, but I do take your point that it's up for grabs and definitely debatable.
Okay, so there was John, Sam, Patrick, and Wangi. Okay, all right, we go that way. John, Sam, and Patrick.
Having heard the paper last week, it improves with age. Two things in terms of what would affect the cross-border, which would damage population growth in one area or another. One, in the SRI, we did a study with a very large sample, 2,000 households in 1986, looking at cross-border shopping. And there was a real concern that people were going across the border because of high indirect taxes in the Republic and buying their shopping north of the border, and it was damaging the retail sector. So that mechanism at the time you would have expected would have benefited villages on the northern side of the border, and they would have actually done well out of the border. They were exploiting it. Actually, I did another study for the Northern Ireland Consumer Council in 1996, very small sample, less satisfactory, where actually some of the trade was in the other direction. But one of the interesting things which just struck me when I heard you talking about the paper today was in terms of your theta. We got good data, and what you found was we estimated a model, and you had to save more and more the further you traveled. So we were able to estimate the cost of travel for households. And one of the things was, once you put a child in the car, you had to save £5 more, because will we ever be there? Will we ever be theirs, or moaning in the car? Which I thought was realistic. So that gave you a decay function on distance. And at the same time, a study was done in Denmark, which showed that Danes were prepared to travel to Germany to save money, and they were prepared to travel much further. Now, it turned out that that was biased because Danish pensioners got on a bus together and they had a sing-along all the way to the border. So they were gaining utility from the travel, and so you had to take them out of sample. The second, so the issue of commercial activity, it could be that from time to time the benefits flowed in one direction or another, and that volatility could have damaged commercial life on both sides. Like petrol stations, there was a guy who owned petrol stations on either side of the border, right on the border, and it was either open on one side of the border or the other, depending on where indirect taxes were. That's certainly post the single market. The second study was done by Sean Lyons, which I contributed to, on cross-border commuting, which is published in 2019. And it showed that people don't commute across the border in the way that there is a border in commuting. In particular for Protestants, northern of the border, they don't commute south of the border in the way that you would expect. So that there are factors, whether they would have commuted absent a border, I'm not sure. But it is trying to visualize what are the commercial changes which would affect the population growth. And those are two, the shopping and the commuting.
Yeah. Well, I've been doing my own qualitative research on traveling cross-border with kids in cars, and I can confirm that it's it does add an extra cost to that travel. But yeah, no, there's lots of different ways. So the border law that I have is very much like how it affects the 1920s Ireland, and then going on from that, there's so many different changes in, fireworks become popular, and but there's always these elements of like, what are all the different factors that could add some kind of inconvenience, or so it's not like well, if it was true in the data that was some kind of like boon to the area having this border, you can now engage in this trade of pig smuggling or different things with selling fireworks, or selling having off license or money changing or whatever. Then it would show up in the data, but I don't see it. It's just not there. So it's either that these inconveniences are still there, or it's that there was this reorientation and then there's a scale effect just amplifying over time. I'm not able to separate out the two, unfortunately, but that would so there's a section in the paper where I talk through the different kind of, people always say now in economics, you have to have a mechanism kind of section. So yeah, but it's not as detailed as the Danes crossing over the border. Sam?
Yeah, really fascinating. I love your data. So I was happy to hear that it holds without controls, right? Because it struck me that like all those controls are affected by your treatment, so you probably have post-treatment bias on those controls, right?
Yeah.
And then the second thing is I wonder if you really have the right counterfactual control population there, because it seems to me that there's a confounding that's just has to do with distance, right? So like I live in Mayo, like it's remote, like it depopulates around the same time, right? And it's nothing to do with the border. It has to do with the fact that you're just far from anywhere.
Yeah.
And so like, could you subsample where, you take out Meath, you take out places that are close, because that's probably doing a lot of weight in your control of the difference, right? And only look at it against sort of similarly remote places, but that didn't have the border effect.
Yeah, I didn't do a subsample analysis like that, but I did think with the latitude and longitude controls, you get at that kind of like, what is the, where are the isobars of these activities? It's like Mayo, okay, yeah, that's far in the west. So that's going to be picked up by the longitude variable, or it's the fact that it's both in the west and a little bit northern as well. So those kind of differences are controlled by the.
I'm not sure that they are. I mean, I'm probably because I think you have your market access measure, which is basically a distance measure, and like I would just sample on whose initial conditions are similarly far away, and just see if it holds, because you have Westport, you have Mayo, you have the east, so they're all kind of similar remote, right?
Yeah, but that's reflected also in the population density and land values as well. They're of a similar population density and land value. So that they're the initial conditions being held constant as well.
Patrick?
Yeah, thank you. The most striking results, I think, are there's a Donegal story. I mean, it's really, I mean, this idea that Donegal would be 50% bigger or whatever the number it was, if it wasn't for the border, is very, very striking. And the other one is the way in which it's not as if things died down, people find ways around it, and the border stops mattering. It actually increases its importance over time. And I'm trying to think of what could and I'm thinking that you've got 1911 road structure, and you went to a lot of trouble getting the 1911 road structure, but the roads are a lot different now. And that might also be because of the border, that they didn't drive a motorway to Donegal. They drove a motorway everywhere else. But there's no motorway going even to Sligo. And there's no motorway, and that's probably because of the border and the political dimension to it. The direct line cuts right through Northern Ireland, and there's going to be no cooperation. There's not going to be a road along it. So here's a dynamic factor that you could also take into account if you sort of did the roads again, maybe in a much cruder way, or just the motorways or the main roads, and this would be the penalty for Donegal. It's really hit. It can't get to Belfast. It can't get to Dublin. It can't even get to Cork. Well, that's a long way anyway. But it's so this is a different type. You're emphasizing the bring the pigs to market story. This is a different type of story. This is saying it doesn't matter what you're producing in Donegal and where it's going. The road structure is going to matter. And I'm wondering whether we really would be worth bringing the roads, the later roads, the roads of even like the 2000s or the 19.
Well, they have we know the railways go from those border areas earlier because it's just not financially feasible to run cross-border railway traffic. So, but I don't know. And in the discussion paper of the, so I didn't get the chance to really do a robustness where I'm able to test these other mechanisms, but that would fit in this idea of public good provision being harder as you get closer to the border, because there's no incentive for the Irish government to build good roads for Northern Ireland and vice versa. But there are modern, the thing about modern road data, it's all online now anyway. So there are shape files that have those. So I could look at those, and recalculate the border loss effect,
So I'm calling you Darcy. What's I forgot your
Michael
Darcy, and then Tom Farrell, and then John Evans. Okay, go ahead.
Some of you in the room know I have looked at roads a bit over the last 2 years, but just on your historical slide, a couple of footnotes. It was actually Her Majesty's Customs and Revenue that introduced that on the 1st of April. They produced the first official order. I actually came across a copy of it. It's actually interesting. The post is only open between 8 and 5 each day, which left a lot of room for
and not on Sundays.
And not on Sundays. And also there was an exception for local agricultural produce, undefined in regard to distance or type. So the whole question of the continuing free movement for agricultural purposes was somewhat somewhat set early in stone.
But there weren't any tariffs.
There weren't, until it came in later, and then things began to tighten up. The second thing is, just for comparative purpose, there was actually only 17 approved roads out of the 280 that crossed the border. And it's interesting because it knows that there was controls on people, but the actual posts that people had to go to were on towns at each end of the approved road, on which were usually a distance from the border in the local town. So the road itself was kind of like a no man's land in some ways for regulatory purposes. But there was an economic, the effect, I'm not surprised at the effect that you have for the North, because I remember coming across an economic geographer in Queens in the 60s who commented that in Northern Ireland, the 3 largest population centres outside Belfast were cut off from the totality of their economic hinterland. And the Donegal effect, you cannot separate from Derry. When you wonder why Derry or Donegal is down, it's Derry. And again, coming back to Mayo, Mayo doesn't have the 5th largest population centre on the island next door. And that's where there was very clear border effect, and it was Enniskillen and Newry, I think, were the other 2 that he mentioned, right? And that was pre the single market, etc. So I think what you're doing is interesting for me in that you're capturing what probably is the lived experience of a lot of people in the border and putting a sort of a rational economic and geographical analysis. But going into the future, the point that you make, if you remove the border or, you know, whatever, because Brexit has brought that back, the effect of 100 years inevitably will take additional support. But I suppose the people in the border are always argue, well, let's not wait for removal. We need this additional support now. Okay. And I suppose my question would be, do you think that there is a case, does your research underpin a case for a special particular economic support for those regions?
Well, it depends on what the policy goal is. If you want to, you know, level up or whatever, seem to be, because there's kind of political incentive to do that, then obviously that's the case. Trying to remove the frictions caused by the border, I don't think is probably a worthwhile goal. If you're trying to just balance things up, I don't think that's going to be a very effective you know, policy tool. So yeah, extra support in whatever way possible would be the way to go, if that's what you wanted to do.
Sorry, I forgot to mention roads. So absolutely political. First motorway in the island from Belfast, across the middle of Northern Ireland, right, and created a corridor there. There's still not a dual carriageway to Derry.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There still isn't a dual carriageway to Derry. Okay. So it's absolutely political. The M1 that goes to the border still isn't matched by the A1. It's the most dangerous piece of road on the island, in my view. It's still not got a barrier down the middle for the stop guards. So there's an absolute inadequacy in the importance of the road infrastructure, as Patrick said, and the effect that it has had on market access. And the final point is, if you go back to 1911, there was an Ulster economy. You know, if you look at the figures for exports from Sligo port, Derry port, etc., and you look at the railway network, there was a genuine Ulster economy that was more not just agricultural produce, but also the manufacturing base driven by Belfast. And what partition really did was split the southern counties away entirely, including Monaghan, from that economic development. It became concentrated on Belfast predominantly instead, until they put in the M1, in fact, and then created that mid-Ulster sort of economic region. So I think really there's what you're highlighting there. There's a lot of interesting elements in it for policy discussion, definitely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom Ferris. I didn't know, in sitting beside Michael, I will be extending his motorway. In fact, my point is, I was very impressed with your analysis. Yeah. This is just a different point on transport, and it is the trade that moves across the border through Northern Ireland ports. And I've been tracking this for years, updating it. There's board hearing you about it. But it goes like this: add all of the containers for the island of Ireland, North and South together, and then use a proxy of GDP. And Northern Ireland has doubled the proportion that one would expect. That's for reasons like it's a very short distance, back to geographic again, more sailings, cheaper rates. And the interesting thing is I've updated it recently for the IIEA, and post-Brexit, Northern Ireland has retained this high proportion. Now you might say there's all sorts of other things, smuggling, etc., that come into it, but it's the dynamic of transport. But it isn't really a question, it's an observation of something else that's happening, and it's quite separate from your wonderful analysis.
No, that's you're hinting at the area I'm going in the future to improve this. So with the paper that I have with Ronan Lyons, we look at the domestic and international getting to those ports, but it doesn't capture the fact that the spatial geography does not stop in Ireland. It goes by the sea to Britain, and then what's happening in Britain? They're getting railways, they have navigable waterways, and so on. And the data is available, but it's a lot of work. So what I'm going to do is actually have those ports. You get to the port, and then you get on the ferry or boat. You go Dublin, Liverpool. I have all the routes, and then I have the rates and times as well. And then when you get there, I know the population of the place where you get there. So I'm going to be able to do that, and that actually relates to this. And what I wasn't able to do here is that they do create a border in the Irish Sea, but it's the Irish Free State who lose out from that. So if someone's saying these areas along the border in Northern Ireland, you're losing your economic hinterland. Part of their response was maybe that was worth it because we retained our market access to Britain, or weren't as affected in the trade war or so on. So that is the goal, to bring in shipping to the analysis, but it's a bit more spatial work and a few sleepless nights. But in future we'll have results of that effect. Yeah.
Very interesting talk. I did work like 10 years ago, Paul, now it's fading memory. I was looking at market structure across the supermarket sector, and I was trying to explain it based on demographics. What kind of population do you need to support 1, 2, 3, 4 supermarkets? And I was able to pick up a border effect, and I kind of was only doing it for this side of the border, but I was controlling for some population centres in Northern Ireland, and was able to pick up a border effect, I think, and I put that down at the time. It was only a cross section, but I was able to put it down to, I put it down to exchange rate volatility.
Yeah.
And I wonder, you've got a nice time series. Would it be worth trying to differentiate by exchange rate regimes? Be part of, say, parity with sterling.
That's embedded in those graphs where you have the effects and the error bars going over time. There's lots of stuff like that happening. I did supervise a student at Queen's who looked at exchange rates and cross-border shopping in a time series model, and you see the effects pretty clearly. People vote with their cars and they go cross-border when the exchange rate differs, and it's pretty big effect. So but integrating it into this analysis would be I think difficult, but might be feasible to bring in that, because I'm only looking at how your market is the population and population centres. So it matters, if you're cut off from Derry, that matters a lot because it's a big population for people in Donegal. But if you're cut off from the sterling, or there's that discrepancy. I don't know how so you probably have some, instead of population, you have some kind of value, and then the value could be changed based on the exchange rate, so to speak, but it'd be difficult.
Brian Hughes, distance decay, proximity to cities, and population comparisons. In the 66 census, Sligo was the 9th largest settlement in the Republic. In the 22 census, 24th was its position. It was twice the population of Letterkenny. Just interesting in the Donegal context, today Letterkenny has almost 2,000 more people than Sligo. The Derry effect, the city of Derry. I think the fact that Sligo is a bit just further away from Galway, for example. I think that's important.
So again, that's going to be in the control in the model, just due to the fact that I have the geographic location and I do have the initial conditions. But of course, even within that, embedded in that Donegal effect, you do have like idiosyncrasies. You saw in the raw data that the places that are in the Republic of Ireland that are lose 30% or more of their market access are the areas where they don't seem to be suffering as badly today. So it's those in that 20 to 30 range. So, there are idiosyncrasies that I'm able to capture.
Owen, thanks. This is probably a bit of a niche question, but your DEDs, they're the electoral districts, is that right?
Yes.
So, we have one set of electoral districts now, or in 2022, another set maybe in 2000, and then going further back to baronies and stuff. How do you fit that in? As in, because they're because presumably your earlier data is big areas and then it gets to smaller areas.
I'm piggybacking on all this amazing work done at Maynooth. So they have that spatial data set that's the kind of like longitudinal core of this, and they have the boundaries. So what I do is I get the CSO and NISRA have the shapefiles, and they don't have they don't publish the DEDs in the same manner anymore. So like I can't do that, but they do have the shapefile, and they do have these like very disaggregated data zones or small area statistics. So what I do is I just get one shapefile, superimpose it on the others, and then just, you know, get the average or whatever. But I'm confident that it will work because, or that it's accurate because the areas are so small that there's, you know, not that much different. And you're doing population counts. So it's a well-tested methodology for aggregating these spatial areas and statistics. And it's, you know, not perfect by any means, but like I've done maps and kind of shared them, and no one's ever kind of pointed and said, look, this looks wrong, and like checking myself, like, well, yeah.
All right, so I think maybe I haven't worked hard enough for the medal. Let's see, can we get a photo of the evidence, you know? So.
Do you want to check my passport?
Yeah, well, maybe. Is it really you?
Oh, I'm the oldest recipient.
We'll change the age from.
You're holding up well.
So that, I tell you, Gazelle gave me that, that's really important, that's 2,500 quid,
yeah.
so don't give that. I nearly lost it 8 times this week, so. We better work on digital transfer.
Yeah.
But here, this is a weird medal.
Oh, wow.
So.
Oh, my son's going to be disappointed, he only likes gold medals.
Maybe maybe we're getting some sponsorship and we're gonna go.
Thank you.
Okay, hey, that's all, folks. And then if the journal's online, but you are of that age or like to get the hard copy. Try the question. One thing, like the interesting thing there is that road structure is great. You know what I mean? But unfortunately, you go back so far. There's arguments because of politics and.
Thank you.
Yeah, good. So I run the journal now for so when you get your final draft, you send it on to me.
Okay. Brilliant.
Alan, I have to run to well done.
Oh, yeah, thanks very much.
So the thing I was thinking about is I always had this the guy from Galway yes, the kind of land use and agriculture go back to time it's really got really got quite concentrated ownership. It's really 65% of the land. But I got we have changed irrigated land size time market. By the supply side, that's looking at more nature of land use, particularly agriculture, right? You know, they find to me that there's a supply chain there and but it's that sort of particularly delayed effects more like maybe land off, change land use for agriculture, so you could do quite a bit, not just on land, but land use, particularly with agriculture. I think it's starting to change quite radically in terms of concentration of ownership, intensification of animals. So my outcome there
paper we have do have an idea for market access. Take the railroads and then because we say, so imagine you had like a very MC who was able to kind of railroad for all the stations, you get the shop, you get the Sean Barrington. Yes, I never met him personally.